And we'll just briefly go through the questions that I sent out, reviewing the session from last week. And then, then we'll look at today we're looking at equanimity, the mind of equanimity. Um, yeah, as a basis for generating bodhicitta and what that means in this context and other kinds of equanimity, and then different ways of meditating to generate more equanimity in our minds. Um, yeah, then we'll have some discussion and a little meditation and then dedicate at the end. Okay, so first just get comfortable in your meditation posture. Scan through your body, check that you're comfortable and relaxed. Especially be aware of any parts of the body where you hold tension or stress or have discomfort, pain. And as you breathe naturally, imagine breathing into those spaces in your body and relaxing, kind of soothing them. And then as you exhale, imagine any tension or stress or sickness or discomfort flows out with your breath and merges into the ground and nourishes the earth. And then gradually focus on your breath. Become aware of your breathing. Just breathe naturally. Observe the sensations of breathing as you inhale and exhale. And just try to focus your attention like that for a couple minutes. When you notice your mind wandering off to think about something else, try to catch that with a corner of your mind, like generate introspection. That's observing yourself meditating. And so with that corner of your mind, when you see your attention wandering off, the object of meditation, the breath in this case, try to catch that as quickly as possible. Then deliberately let go of chasing after those other things other than the breath that are a distraction in this case, and bring your attention back to simply observing the breath in the present moment. So then as one way of generating a motivation, I think last week we meditated on loving kindness. So this week let's meditate on compassion. Mm. So yeah, we'll just do it in a very simple way. First, in order to, compassion is the mind observing suffering or, yeah, pain and dissatisfaction, any form of suffering, very obvious or very subtle. And then as we observe that suffering or suffering person, then having the wish that they be free from that form of suffering and the causes of that. So, yeah, in order to genuinely have empathy for others, first we have to have, a sense of our own suffering, pain, or dissatisfaction. Yeah, and generate compassion for ourselves. So begin with that. Look at, yeah, in the present moment, or generally this time in your life, or at any time in your life, different problems you face, unpleasant, painful, kind of difficult aspects of your experience. So you know, with the great acceptance and concern and, yeah, kind heart, observe your own, yeah, with great kindness, in short, observe your own challenges, difficulty. And then as you observe those, just, yeah, have a sense of, what it is like to experience suffering. So have empathy for oneself, and then transform that into compassion, wishing that may I be free, just with a great kindness, wishing for oneself. Don't have to know how, or, yeah, how that's going to work out, but just having the wish to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering, yeah, for oneself. So first, spend a minute just generating compassion directed at oneself. Mhm. And then spend a few minutes gradually extending this attitude to others in any way you like. Yeah, one way is to imagine oneself surrounded by friends and family, strangers and enemies. Another way is just to think kind of geographically, just spreading out like ripples in a pond spread out from, when a stone is thrown into a pond, the ripples spread out um, in circles away from it. So we can also just imagine compassion from our heart spreading out around us to more and more people and animals, sentient beings, and gradually encompassing everyone in the world. Mhm. So, yeah, for a few minutes, extend this attitude of compassion, observing the suffering of others. And as that comes to mind, then generating the intention, may they be free from this suffering. Even may I be able to free them. And especially whatever I do in this session, may it contribute to myself and others being freed from suffering and the causes of suffering. Well, then we'll just recite a few verses of prayers. Mm, Where are they? Oh, yeah. So first is verse of homage to the Buddha. Here in the first line, it mentions the Buddha's compassion, that the Buddha compelled by compassion, meaning that, everything that the Shakyamuni Buddha did, everything he taught was compelled by this attitude of compassion, wishing to free sentient beings from suffering. Then he, in this case, is praising him for having taught the Dharma, especially emptiness. Compelled by great compassion, you taught the sacred Dharma to dispel all wrong views. To you, the Buddha Gautama, I pay homage. Do not commit any unwholesome actions. Engage in perfect wholesome actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Then we can offer a short mandala offering as customary at the beginning of a teaching. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kamniratayami. And then we can recite the verse of refuge of Bodhichitta. If you like, you can join. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections of explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections of explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. So if you like, you can visualize from Shakyamuni Buddha's holy body and space in front, then boundless white light rays radiate out, purifying oneself and all sentient beings of suffering and the causes of suffering. And then boundless golden light rays radiate out from Buddha's holy body, blessing oneself and all sentient beings to have every form of well-being and happiness and positive qualities up to full enlightenment. And then the Buddha comes to the crown of, above, to the space above the crown of your head and abides there. Mm. Yeah, I wanted to mention, I don't think I've mentioned here yet, in this verse of taking refuge in journeying bodhicitta, in the, mm, well, I mean, it mentions bodhicitta indirectly. When the first line where it says, I take refuge until I am enlightened, right? So that's kind of implying that our aim is to eventually become enlightened, to become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha. And we take refuge until we achieve that. I guess once you're enlightened, you don't need to take refuge anymore because you've you're protected from everything. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. And then it goes to this third line. By my two collections, so that's refuge. The first two lines are concerning going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. And then the last two lines is the attitude of bodhicitta explicitly. It says and this is by my two collections. Here, the two collections means collections of merit and wisdom. Um, so, and these are to become enlightened. We need to accumulate these two collections. Accumulate wisdom, understanding emptiness on the one hand, and accumulate the collection of merit, which comes from engaging in positive actions of body, speech, and mind, right? Whereas the accumulation of wisdom comes from generating more and more clear and broad and detailed understanding of reality, of how things exist, how we exist, how others exist, especially dependent arising and emptiness, these views of philosophical view of reality. Um, Whereas the collection of merit comes from engaging in positive actions with our body, speech, and mind, which is primarily shaped by our motivation, which is why we take time to generate a positive motivation at the outset of a session. Um, and so within in the collection of merit, bodhicitta is the most powerful attitude to accumulate merit. Any action that we do with bodhicitta, or even for us, it's contrived bodhicitta. Now we have to put effort to giving rise to that attitude. But if we can sincerely give rise to this aspiration that may I eliminate all faults of body, speech, and mind, and develop, increase, and develop to perfection every positive quality, in order to be of greater service to the world and to other sentient beings, then any action we engage in with that attitude becomes a very powerful positive action, and that um, is a powerful way to accumulate merit, right? Um, so these two collections, then, it's the collection of wisdom becomes the primary cause for achieving the omniscient mind of a Buddha, of an enlightened being, whereas the collection of merit is the primary cause to achieve a Buddha's enlightened form, the body, which appears to others and then inspires and guides others by his appearance. Um, yeah, and also the speech gives rise to the speech, which is an aspect of the body. Yeah. So we make this prayer by my two collections so the collections of merit and the wisdom that I accrue so for the audience, then this prayer is written for the audience, right? By listening to the Dharma. So that's why you say that, by my two collections that I accumulate by listening to the Dharma. But the teacher says, you might have noticed I said by explaining the Dharma, because the teacher's main role in this kind of setting is to explain. So they say, by my two collections from explaining the Dharma. And then make this kind of dedication. May I become a Buddha. May I become a fully enlightened being. Why? In order to benefit transmigratory beings. So in order to benefit, transmigratory beings means beings who take rebirth and then experience old age, sickness, and then death, and then take rebirth again and again and again. So they transmigrate from one life to another, from one reincarnation or one rebirth to another, moving from body to body. The continuity of consciousness moves from one body to another, and thereby they're called this transmigratory beings. So why do we want to become enlightened? In order to benefit. And that expresses, I mean, that succinctly expresses bodhicitta. May I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. If you want to give the shortest description of bodhicitta, it's that line. Yeah. So today, okay, so now we'll go to the review. Last week I went over mainly the definition of bodhicitta. And then I sent out some questions afterwards. Today I was preparing for class and I was looking at I think Venerable, another monastic who taught discovering Buddhism before. My cursor is not working, so they anyway I looked at the self-assessment questions at the end of the course, and they're very easy. My questions are much harder than theirs. So I wonder how you did with those, how you did with the questions. All right, what's happening with my thing now? Just not 1 minute. Sorry for the fumbling around. All right, here. All right. Here, there. Okay. Huh. Strange. I keep clicking on the questions. They show up, and then I go to make it larger, and then it goes to a different document. All right. Let me just go to before I share it, I'll just go here and make it larger. Okay, now I'll share it. Anyway, one of the questions is, all right. Yeah, what are the meanings of each part of the Sanskrit word bodhicitta? Bodhi and chitta. Yes. Bodhi is mind. Chitta? Anybody? You know sound? You just throw it out there, Swan. You know. Chitta. You know? No, chitta is mind. You're saying bodhi is mind. No. Chitta is mind. Chitta, yeah. Bodhi? Come on. Bodhi's, yeah. Awakened or enlightenment? Yeah. Bodhi means fully awakened or fully enlightenment. Yeah. Bodhi. So it's yeah. And so it's the mind aspiring to enlightenment. Yeah. Exactly. And then what is the main cause for developing bodhicitta? Anyone online too, I can, sorry, I'm not, because I'm sharing, I'm not seeing you all, but you can, if you want to answer, just unmute yourself and say, if you're online, or those in the room. What's the main cause for developing bodhicitta?
The main cause is like to help all sentient beings to be free of suffering.
Exactly. That's right. Compassion. You can say, and you can even say great compassion, because compassion can be, for ourselves or for one other person, it's just compassion. But when we extend that attitude to all sentient beings, um, that's more like universal compassion. And then beyond that, when we have a personal sense of personal responsibility, thinking I myself will do whatever I can to free all sentient beings from suffering, then it becomes great compassion. So yeah, great compassion is the main cause for bodhicitta. And then is bodhicitta a sense consciousness or a mental consciousness? Yes, it's a mental consciousness. Yes. Again, Suan is our star student today. Here. Okay. Brett? Yeah. Sense consciousness is like a consciousness that depends on a sense power. We have 5 sense powers: eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, sense powers. So it's like an eye sense consciousness. So it's something in a sense consciousness, so independence upon a sense power, they can only perceive physical objects in the environment around us or within our body. And they can't think about that, no. They just perceive what appears to them, right? Whereas mental consciousness is the mind. So whenever we remember something, we think about something, we make a judgment or just this is this is that. It's a mental consciousness. Yeah, so bodhicitta is a mental consciousness. Most of when we're meditating, we're primarily working with the mental consciousness. We're not, we're not giving attention to the sense consciousness. Yeah. And yeah, it's the mental consciousness that goes from life to life in an active form. All right, then 4. Bodhicitta is said to be a mind possessing 2 aspirations. So there's a causal aspiration and then a concordant aspiration. So what is the causal aspiration and what is the companion or concordant aspiration possessed by bodhicitta? So the first, what's the causal aspiration of bodhicitta? Well, hint, it's the same as the main cause of bodhicitta. Yeah, great compassion. Yeah. So compassion is an aspiration, the wish, the aspiration that may I free all sentient beings from suffering. So that's the causal aspiration. And then what's the concordant or the companion aspiration of bodhicitta? I mean, this is a little bit difficult because usually when we think of bodhicitta, we think of it in terms of this concordant aspiration, where actually, the bodhicitta is actually the main mind observing full enlightenment, our own future enlightenment, primarily, our own, the enlightenment that we'll achieve in the future, observing that. And then together with that, there's an aspiration thinking, I want to achieve that, right? So that's the concordant aspiration, is the aspiration for our own future enlightenment. And the causal is, in order to free all sentient beings from suffering. That's what gives rise to that wish. So those are the two. And then 5, how is bodhicitta defined? Give your own or the textbook definition of bodhicitta. Yeah, so last week in the class I gave the textbook definition, which is quite, I don't know, Tibetan you say trakpo. It's a bit difficult, a bit intractable. But yeah, I don't know. How can we just give a kind of simple definition of bodhicitta? Anyone want to try? Yes. Andrew, right? Yes. Ander. Okay. Okay. Hmm. Okay, I like your bringing emptiness into it. That's good, but it's not required. You can have bodhicitta without having realized emptiness. But most people realize emptiness first and then generate bodhicitta. And I'll come back to why that is. But yeah, anyone else want to try? Come on, some of you were here last week. Oh. Suan, you hold on a minute. You've answered so many questions already. I think there's something in the chat box. Leah, can you keep track of the chat box and just let me know if there's something I need to look at in there? Oh, really? Okay, great. Bodhicitta. Okay, so here's from Madhu. Bodhicitta is a wish for others and myself to be happy. That's close, but that's more like metta, loving kindness. The wish for self and others to be happy is like loving kindness. Bodhicitta has to be something more than that. Like loving kindness, that kind of universal love for myself and others to be happy, it can be a cause of bodhicitta. And it's important, but it's not actual. And then I'm not sure, how do you say this your name? X-A-N, Shan, maybe? The aspiration and intention to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, vowing to liberate all beings from, yes, so that's excellent. That's really that's a good summary. The aspiration and intention to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, or in order to accomplish the welfare of all sentient beings is another way to say. Yeah. And then he adds, vowing to liberate all beings from suffering. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a vow, but often goes together with a vow. Yeah. Zan. Okay. Z-A-N. Zan. Okay. Um, and then another person online adds aspiration compelled by compassion, wishing to free oneself and all others from suffering. Yes, wishing to free oneself and others from suffering, but the essential element is wishing to achieve full enlightenment, right? That has to be there also. So basically, it has these two elements. In order to free all sentient beings from suffering or benefit all sentient beings, I will become enlightened. Right? I wish I aspire to become enlightened. I want to become enlightened, is essentially it. And then, to define it a bit better, you add, and it's a main mind, and it's the entrance to the Mahayana path, or abides within the class of the entrance to the Mahayana path, which maybe no need to go into now. what that is exactly. And then 6, yeah, this I spent a bit of time explaining last week. What is the difference between contrived and uncontrived bodhicitta? Right, maybe just that first. Anyone remember from last week? Yes? That's right. That's contrived. Contrived is kind of faking it. You have to make effort to generate that attitude. Yeah. And then what's making it? What do you mean? What would that mean to like you fake it until what? So that would be contrived bodhicitta. So by contrast, what's uncontrived bodhicitta then? Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Remember, there's a nice example of like, a loving parent who's lost their like a young child of theirs has died, and they feel grief, and to give rise to that kind of grief, they don't need to make any effort. It just spontaneously arises, and it continuously arises. It's in the mind all the time for a period, for a long period often. And so bodhicitta, uncontrived bodhicitta, is similar in that of course, it's not a grief, but it's one becomes so habituated to that outlook on life, to that attitude, to that aim in life, that personal aim in life, that it arises continuously and spontaneously. So it becomes uncontrived when we don't need to contrive it. We don't need to make effort to give rise to that attitude. It's just kind of how becomes part of who we are, and that attitude arises continuously, and it spontaneously is present, no matter what we're doing. Basically, like that. That's uncontrived bodhicitta. So, and then in general, when an ordinary person who is not on any path of bodhisattvas, heroes, or solitary realizers meditates on bodhicitta, do they generate contrived or uncontrived bodhicitta in the mental continuum? Right? So for like us, when we meditate on bodhicitta now, are we generating contrived bodhicitta or uncontrived bodhicitta? Contrived, yeah, contrived bodhicitta. That's right. We're faking it. And eventually, if we keep doing that, we'll make it, right? It'll become more and more habitual for us. It's a matter of familiarity. Supported by reasons. Also a matter of understanding the reasons, of which emptiness is one of the main ones. It said most like a practitioner of sharp faculties, of like greater intelligence practitioner, which is most people with a modern education in a way, but they basically one feature of such a person that is being labeled that way, someone of sharp faculties, is that they don't easily accept things. They're a bit skeptical, right? They don't just accept anything that someone says. So they don't easily do things on faith, right? They need to see a good reason why they should believe something. And by extension, they need to, before they promise to do something, they need to feel some confidence that they can actually do that, because they don't want to promise or agree to do something and then go back on that, right? A more intelligent person kind of thinks that way. So for someone of sharp faculties, of greater intelligence, before they generate an aspiration to achieve enlightenment, to free all sentient beings from suffering, they want to check first: is it really possible to be free one person from suffering? Not to mention all sentient beings. If it's true for one person, then maybe it's true for all sentient beings. So is it possible to free all sentient beings from suffering? Is that even realistic possibility? And then two, is enlightenment possible or not? To establish both of those things, one has to realize emptiness, because it's based on the realization of emptiness that I mean that because the wisdom realizing emptiness is the antidote to the fundamental cause of suffering, right? So one has to understand how that is the case before, a more intelligent person decides that I'm going to devote myself to this attitude. So most they first realize emptiness, and then combine that with great compassion, and then generate bodhicitta. But there are some who more do things more, they're more inspired by faith. They meet a teacher who's inspiring, or they're just inspired by this incredibly vast and profound ideal. And even without realizing all the reasoning to back it up, they're just, taken by that, and they develop that attitude, and then later realize emptiness. So there's two different kinds. And then the final question for review is, what are some benefits you have felt or that you find most inspiring about the attitude of bodhicitta? Yeah, this is a personal. I mean, you can answer for yourself. Maybe we can come back to that next week because that's actually part of the presentation. I think this is breathing into this. I didn't get to last week. Was the benefits of bodhicitta. So I'll jump to that now. Just play catch up a little bit. There we go. So actually it was, yeah, there's a list of 8 benefits of bodhicitta that, yeah, I don't know. I find it a bit dry in a way, but it's, I mean, if you can think about it in different ways, then it make it a bit more juicy. But yeah, why don't we just go briefly through the list? And then, yeah, you can use as a basis for just reflecting in your own way. So yeah, so some benefits of generating bodhicitta. Yeah, you gain the name, a child of the victors. And so here the idea is that victors is an epithet of the Buddhas, of enlightened beings, but it also has the connotation of like a king. So just as like a child of a king becomes a prince or a princess just by virtue of being born to that person, means that they're in line to sit on the throne and to have reign over the kingdom. So similarly, the idea is that the analogy is that by generating the attitude of bodhicitta, then one becomes in line to become a Buddha, right? If a king is like an enlightened being, or an enlightened being is kind of analogous to a king, then it's like by generating this attitude of bodhicitta, one becomes like in the hereditary line of a Buddha, not literally, but figuratively. So, because it's primarily that attitude, the aspiration to achieve enlightenment, and not for a selfish aim, but through purely altruistic, with a purely altruistic intention, by generating that attitude, one becomes kind of a heir of or a child of the Buddhas. And that's another epithet for a bodhisattva, as a child of the victors. Two, you outshine the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. So these are practitioners whose main motivation is to free themselves from the suffering of samsara, right? Because so the motivation is much more limited, primarily to one's own achieving nirvana for oneself alone. So since a bodhisattva's, the attitude of bodhicitta is primarily not concerned with one's own welfare, but with accomplishing the welfare of others, then they outshine um, those practitioners. Then third, they become the supreme object of offering. So because they, by generating this talk about uncontrived bodhicitta, then one becomes like a very virtuous object because one's aim is so positive. Um, then anyone who shows respect or makes offerings to one, they accumulate merit by force of one's own motivation, right? Um, yeah. Uh, it's kind of like a really excellent charitable project, you know, with an excellent charitable project that is benefiting, millions of people, maybe feeding millions of people or something. Even we just give $1 to that, it's contributing to this amazing project. So we accumulate a lot of merit by virtue of, contributing to the meritorious activity of this project, right? So similarly, if one person has this incredible aspiration to achieve full enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings, then they become a powerful object of offering in that way. Then four, you amass an enormous accumulation of merit with ease. So this I explained in relation to the prayer we did earlier, um, but basically it's thinking like this because and there are countless sentient beings, right? There's countless people other than us in the world. Among humans, we're only one of maybe 7 or 8 billion, and then there's countless animals. So even if we just look at planet Earth, there's countless number of beings with a mind like us who want to be free from suffering and want to have happiness, just like we do. So when we extend the sphere of our concern to all those beings, and we're genuinely, wishing to benefit and to free them from suffering, then that is like the power of that attitude is infinite because the object, the number of sentient beings who are the object of that attitude is infinite. And then up on top of that, if we have the wish not only to, free them from temporary suffering, but to ultimately free them from all the suffering of samsara, that's also extremely vast and profound. And then on top of that, if we have the aspiration that I myself will personally take responsibility and I myself will achieve full enlightenment in order to benefit all the sentient beings, then it's even more like profound and vast. So by having that kind of bodhicitta attitude, then everything one does with that attitude, you accumulate a huge amount of merit. Yeah. And then five, you rapidly purify sins and obscurations. So because this attitude is so positive, then it's a powerful counteracting force to negative attitudes like selfishness and greed or envy, and these kind of small-minded attitudes, especially anger. No, it's directly like opposite to anger, which is a mind wishing to harm others, right? Um, yeah, so it purifies these negative attitudes and obscurations of the mind, because negative attitudes obscure the mind, right? And then six, you accomplish whatever you wish, right? Um, I mean, you can't take it too literally, right? It's not like you can just, suddenly fly through the sky and go to the beach on a sunny day or something. But if your long-term aspirations, basically you can say it leads from happiness to happiness. No, it's taking you in the right direction. So you accomplish more and more and more of what you wish for. Of course, assuming you have wholesome aspirations. And then seven, you are not bothered by harm or hindrance. Yeah. I know I used to, for a while, I was writing letters to a man who was in prison in California somewhere. And, he was Buddhist and quite devout, um, but also very frank. And there's some prayers, like I think the King of Prayers, where it says, anyone who reads this, they'll kind of get whatever they wish. And he's like, I've been wishing to get out of prison for years, and I've read this so many times, and I'm still here, right? And it's like, yeah, you have to take it with a grain of salt. It's not like whatever you wish is going to happen. It can't take too literally. Seven, you are not bothered by harm or hindrances, right? Yeah, so even, because your aspiration is very far, is very high, is very noble aspiration, then of course difficulties are going to come by the way. But relative to one's, higher purpose, those all seem minor, right? So one isn't particularly bothered by those kind of short-term setbacks and difficulties. And also because one creates positive karma continuously. You don't create negative karma. So then the karma, so you don't create negative karma, and you also don't give rise to many afflictive emotions, which are catalysts for negative karma to ripen, right? So you have very little negative karma ripening. So you don't experience many harm or hindrances. Eight, you quickly complete all the stages of the path. So yeah, compared to not generating bodhicitta or not practicing dharma, you quickly, you know, progress towards enlightenment. And then because, the other alternative, especially if you don't practice dharma at all, then you cycle in samsara endlessly, right? So compared to endless suffering, even a long time practicing bodhicitta is a relatively short time. And then nine, you become a fertile source of every happiness for others, right? So you actually benefit others because in this life and future lives, that's your intention. So you engage in things that are beneficial to others. So yeah, those are like kind of the traditional benefits. But I think when we look at our own personal experience, it can be quite different, right? um, Benefits that we see. I remember when I first learned about this attitude of bodhicitta in like 99 at a 10-day intro course at Kopan. I took a 5-day intro course before that. They must have explained bodhicitta, but I don't remember at all. But it was when Annie Karen at Kopan I heard her explain about bodhicitta, and it really, yeah, it really moved my mind to think, one, to think that, some ordinary person like me can become enlightened, and this is why, and then two, just to have just, it was kind of, I never imagined such a vast aspiration to use my life. I had thought of the aspiration to use my life to benefit others, but I was thinking more, more in like, I don't know, bit limited terms, people in my family, my friends, people I know, like that. No. But then to think, to benefit all sentient beings, like no matter who they are, is so much more vast. I thought, it's just amazing, beautiful, vast attitude to have. So I was, and then just, yeah, that I felt so beneficial to kind of open my imagination to what's possible to do, or at least to aspire to do, with a human life. Yeah, something very beautiful that I think is rare in the world. You don't hear, many people talking about, aspiring to something so vast like that, and meaningful and profound, right? Yeah, then these are some verses I read some of last week. And then here we are today. So this is what we want to work on today. And uh-oh, we don't have much time left. Anyway, equanimity is quite straightforward. So today we're primarily working on this attitude of equanimity. Yeah, so first I'll just briefly look at four kinds of equanimity, and then reasons for meditating. Why is it important to meditate on equanimity first, at the outset of generating bodhicitta, right? There's two main methods for generating bodhicitta: the sevenfold cause and effect method, and the method of exchanging self, or equalizing and exchanging self and others. But as a preliminary to both, it's important to meditate on equanimity, which here means generating an equal sense of concern for others, one that's unbiased, right? And then actual methods, ways to actually generate that immeasurable equanimity. Mm, yeah. So just briefly, these different kinds of equanimity is a translation of the Tibetan term danyom, danyom, and danyom has different meanings in different contexts, and so that's what we're talking about here. How this term equanimity, it can mean different things in different contexts. So in one, meditative equanimity means remaining in a meditative state wherein antidotes are not applied, right? So this is more talking about generating single point in concentration, where we're doing placement meditation, just focusing on a single object and trying to keep our attention there, completely focused without being distracted whatsoever, and without becoming too excited or too dull, with a very stable, clear quality of attention on one object, for as long as we like, basically. And so that's so sort of meditative equanimity is where we can, we decide I'm going to focus my attention on this object, and then we can remain completely focused on that object without needing to make adjustments, without needing to apply antidotes to laxity or excitement, right? So that's one way that term is used, meditative equanimity. And then another equanimity is like neutral feelings. So feelings that are unaffected by pleasant or unpleasant experience. So neutral, we have three different kinds of feelings, basically. Pleasant feelings, like pleasant physical sensations, or a happy feeling in the mind goes with a kind of pleasant. Happiness in the mind comes with a pleasant feeling, or unhappiness in the mind comes with a kind of painful feeling. And then there's also, of course, painful physical sensations. So it can be mental feelings or physical feelings. But there's pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So another way equanimity is used to describe the neutral feelings. And in this context is not important for us. Then equanimity of self and others. So here's an attitude not biased in the degree of concern for self and others. So in the method of equalizing and exchanging self and others, this is the kind of equanimity they're talking about, where because usually we're primarily concerned about ourselves and not so concerned about others. average person, you can say. Um, or, I'm thinking, a big exception might be parents who have, who care about their children very much. Then, it can be they more concerned about their children than themselves. Um, but it's still, yeah, um, yeah. I mean, still it can be mixed a lot in different contexts, and there's still it's kind of like there's a bit of I'm concerned about these children because they're my children, right? There's still like you care about your children more than someone else's, so because there's a sense of you care about what you identify with closely. So when we identify with a group or something, we care about that group and not the other group. Um, so there's still kind of a bias, no, towards ourself or towards what we consider as mine, me and mine. Um, where here, so in this kind of equanimity, we try to reduce that bias towards what we identify with and against what we identify as bad or are kind of antagonist to. And we try to generate a sense of equal concern. That we'll come back to in the next couple sessions. But this attitude, so this equanimity of equalizing the sense of concern for self and others, where we try to have an attitude that's not biased in the degree of concern for self and others, and rather we try to have an equal sense, an equal degree of concern for each individual, sentient being, for all others and ourselves. And then, but here today we're primarily concerned with this immeasurable equanimity. So there's these four immeasurable attitudes: immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. And so this is within those four. And here there's these two. It's to be so there's the immeasurable equanimity, which is to be practiced, where oneself. So where we try to within oneself having an unbiased regard for friends, enemies, and strangers, right? So where we try to generate an equal sense of concern for for others who are that we consider friends or we consider strangers or we consider enemies, people we typically dislike or are most prone to become angry with. Um, yeah, so we try to generate an equal sense of concern for others, as opposed to the one before, where we try to generate equal sense of concern between self and others, like reduce the concern for self, increase the self for others. Here it's more talking about within others, having concern for others in an equal way. And then what is to be achieved is gradually, by us generating that attitude, is to lead other sentient beings to generate that attitude. So what is to be achieved is all sentient beings being free from attachment and anger towards each other, right? So what we were aiming to do is, be a role model and be a teacher to others, and so help others reduce their biased attitude, where they're attached to some and averse to others, right? But first we have to start with ourselves, of course. So this immeasurable equanimity is what we're talking about. Okay, so then the reasons why is it important to generate this equanimity first? And there's two pictures here, which are the two analogies. It's like if you're going to plant crops in a field, first you need to prepare the field, right? You need to make the field even. So because a field is like kind of hilly in a way, or there's lumps. There's higher. Some places are higher and some places are lower. Then when it rains, the water will go to the low places and flood the crops, and the high places won't get enough water, right? So if you level the field first, make the field level, then all the crops will kind of grow evenly. And then similarly, if you're making a fresco or a mural, like on a wall, like mm, who's the Sistine Chapel? Michael Michelangelo, yeah, like Michelangelo. First, you need to make the surface smooth, right, of the wall, and then you can paint like clearly on it or draw or paint clearly on it. So like that, before we generate attitude of universal loving kindness or universal compassion, first we need to reduce our bias in favor of some and against others. Because otherwise, the more we generate loving kindness or compassion, we easily generate for those we already like And then for those we dislike, we don't really generate, right? So it's not, it's not evenly extended to all beings. So that's why we generate equanimity first. So in order to develop universal love and compassion, and in order to develop unbiased and impartial love and compassion. Yeah, and then there's these two analogies, leveling the ground in a field before planting, and then smoothing out the surface of a wall before painting a mural or fresco. Okay, so then the actual method. Um, yeah, and there's, let me see, four main points here. And then we'll meditate a bit. Let's see. Okay. So one, reflect how, and these are kind of four reasons, right? Reflect how all sentient beings, so everyone with a mind, are the same as us in desiring happiness and freedom from suffering. So this is a very, I mean, this issue is very deep for contemplation. This is something, I mean, in my own experience, I've seen how, reflecting on this again and again over, 25 years, it changes and it just, yeah, becomes, I mean, understanding and sense for like what that means and how, yeah, I mean, you can cultivate that, it becomes deeper and deeper, and then also just reflecting on the truth of that becomes deeper and deeper the more you consider it. So yeah, so we'll spend a bit of time reflecting on that. I mean, and like most things, when we meditate, I mean, like an idea like this that we meditate on, it's not, we don't want to meditate in the way that, like, assuming that that's true and just trying to agree with that, right? It's better to approach it again with a bit of skepticism, like, and ask the question, is that true or not, right? Is it true that all sentient beings are the same in desiring to have happiness and be freedom and freedom from suffering? And then, yeah, we might find some examples that seem to support that, but it's also important to look for examples that seem to not support that in order to bring up doubts about whether that's true or not. And then consider those counterexamples and, are they so strong that we feel like this is not true? Or is there a way maybe of looking at those examples, those look like counter examples that lead us to kind of a deeper maybe understanding of what this is about. Like one counterexample would be, you could think, well, insects, small insects like mosquitoes or ants or something, like they don't have a desire to be happy. They never think like, oh, I want to be, they never get up in the morning. You're like, I want to have a happy day today. No. But, and then, yeah, and they don't like think about being free from suffering. But so but is that true for them? Um, well, yeah, on a different level though, when they're hungry, they they feel hunger and they want to be free from that. So then they go in search of food. And when they receive food, they feel nourished by that and it relieves the pain of and the weariness of hunger. And so there's a kind of happiness. It's not like what we would ordinarily think of as happiness, but it's a kind of desire for sustenance and well-being. And so, yeah, and one other way of looking at this is that all sentient beings, they instinctively, intuitively, they cherish their own life. No, every every sentient being in some way they cherish their life. They want to preserve their life. It's part of our evolutionary biology that we do that. And so when they encounter things that contribute to the sustenance and nourishing of their life, whether it's their physical life or their mental life, they experience kind of well-being. They experience happiness. When they encounter things that are a threat to that or destroy or harm that, then they experience suffering, right? So all beings have that instinct. But again, it's best to approach it as a question and then check, is it true or not? And then the next, reflect how, from the perspective of oneself, all sentient beings have been equally both friends, enemies, and strangers to us through countless lifetimes. And even in this lifetime, these identifications change quickly, right? So if we imagine, so when we meditate, which we need to start soon, we imagine ourselves surrounded by those we consider friends onto our right and left and behind us. And then those we consider like enemies is a bit heavy, but we have an antagonistic relationship with. Sometimes it can be, same person as a family member or friend, and also there's a lot of antagonism or anger. So we imagine those people sitting directly in front, facing towards us at a comfortable distance, a little bit lower, so they're not like, we don't feel like they're threatening us right in our face or something. Um, and then all the other sentient beings of planet Earth or whatever other sentient beings exist anywhere. Imagine them all around us. So those are strangers, the ones we don't have a special affection or aversion for, the strangers. Um, and yeah, so one way to generate equanimity is to reflect on how, well, okay, I consider these people my friends, these my enemies, and these my strangers. But those labels are just labels from my perspective, and they're not fixed. Sometimes someone who was an enemy later in life, they become a friend. Someone who was a stranger, they can become a friend or enemy. Just in one life, these switch places. And so I shouldn't give so much importance to the way I relate to this person at this particular moment because it can change. And that's just thinking on the scale of one life. Then we think on the scale of many lives. Like all the people we know in this life, they're going to die. We're going to die. Then we take rebirth in a different form. We won't recognize any of them, right? Just like all the people we were great friends with, last life, or even our parents, they've died, we've died. We take rebirth as humans and we meet again, you know, then they don't recognize us, we don't recognize them, right? So and then the logic is that we've had countless rebirths in the past. So in countless, past rebirths, you can't point. There's no sentient being we can point to who has never been either a dear friend or a family member, or even a parent, or an enemy, or a stranger. They all change places all the time. So thinking on this greater scale of many lives, then it makes sense to generate an equal sense of concern for others. And that's supported by this quotation from a sutra. So it's spoken by the Buddha. It says, within a short space of time, an enemy can become a friend, and a friend can become an enemy. Likewise, either one may become indifferent, while those who are indifferent may become enemies or intimate friends. Knowing this, the wise never form attachments. They never give up the thought of delighting in friends, and are content to focus on virtue. Yeah, that's a bit of. I mean, there's definitely some questions arise about that. They never give up. No, sorry, they give up the thought of delighting in friends. That sounds a bit heavy, no? Um, I think it's okay to delight in friends, but it means like not having this unrealistic expectation that friends will ultimately bring me happiness. No, we have to find a source of happiness within ourselves. We can't always be depending upon others to make us happy. And then these last two things, I'm not sure we'll get to meditating on all this today, but anyway, that'll help you as you meditate during the week. From the perspective of others, all sentient beings are equally friends, enemies, and strangers, right? So even as someone who's like, from our perspective, they're, an enemy, there's other people that look at them as a dear friend, right? And many other people look at them as a stranger. So why should we be so invested in our particular perspective on other people? We're just one person in the world. Someone we consider as a dear friend, other people might look at them as an enemy or a stranger, right? So if we think from the perspective of other people, then then others are equally friends, enemies, and strangers. Why is our own perspective on others so important? No. Um, so we can look, yeah, in a broader way that way. And then finally, the fourth, meditate on the antidotes to anger and attachment, right? So our main problem is being too attached um, to friends and family, and then being averse to having anger towards enemies. So the more we can reduce the anger and reduce attachment and increase a universal sense of caring, then the more equanimous we become. So what did I write here? All suffering and harm comes from afflictive emotions, not sentient beings. All happiness comes from virtuous minds or virtuous attitudes. Others can neither give those to us or take them away. Oh, yeah. So the first is kind of an antidote to anger. Seeking that, because we become angry at others mainly because we feel like they make us suffer, right? But suffering actually is a result of our own karma that we've accumulated, which is a result of our own afflictive emotions, disturbing emotions, which have led us into creating negative karmas. Sentient beings are just kind of a vehicle to to deliver, our own karmic results back to us. Um, so we shouldn't be angry at sentient beings. If there's any resentment, it should be against the own negative karma we've created in the past. So that's one antidote to anger. And then an antidote to attachment is this: how recognizing that all happiness comes from our virtuous attitudes, our virtuous minds, and our virtuous actions, our positive karma, in short. Others can either give those to us or take them away, right? So others can't fundamentally cause us well-being and happiness. Um, they can help with that, but again, it's like they're a vehicle for our own, um, the seeds of our own positive karma ripening. Anyway, that's a couple ways to think. So let's maybe take a break for a couple minutes, and then we'll meditate. No, otherwise it's a bit heavy. Take a drink of water or something if you like. Yeah. Let's go ahead and start. Yeah, so start by just getting comfortable in your meditation posture and gradually coming back to your breath. Mhm. And then, yeah, visualize first of all your mother of this life seated at your immediate left, or imagine your mother of this life seated at your left, or your main female caregiver. And then your other female friends and family. Imagine them seated to your left and behind you, or your grandmothers and aunts and so forth, sisters or daughters. And then at your right, imagine your father or main male caregiver of this life, and then your other male friends and family, all to your right and behind you. And then those whom you're most prone to have aversion for. or become angry at, or you feel antagonistic towards. Imagine them seated in front of you, facing towards you, a little lower down at a comfortable distance. And this is in order to remind us that we need to make special effort to generate loving kindness and compassion towards these people. And you could have the same person, might be a family member, but also someone you're prone to become angry at. You can have them also, to your right or left and behind you, and also in front facing towards. That's helpful. Mm. And then imagine all the other sentient beings, so all the other human beings and animals and hell beings, hungry ghosts, gods, demigods. Imagine them all in human form, seated around you, as vast as space. So this is the class of strangers, those we don't have a special attraction to, or affection for, or aversion towards. We tend to have a neutral attitude towards them. And so towards the strangers, there's a danger that we just have kind of just a lack of concern, just sort of we're dismissive of them. Okay, so then when we do this meditation, it's helpful. Gradually, we want to extend, all these attitudes we meditate on towards all the sentient beings. But it can be a bit abstract if we just try to do that immediately. So it's helpful to imagine before us one representative of each group, right? So imagine just in the space in front of you, one friend and one stranger and one enemy. Imagine them either sitting or standing kind of in the space before you. So first we'll work on just generating a more equal sense of concern for these three individuals. And then gradually you can extend to the entire group. So begin with the first contemplation, that others are the same as me in wishing to be free from suffering and to have happiness and well-being. So if you've not contemplated that already with regard to yourself, then first, you need to just get a sense of how is it true for, ask the question, is it true for me that I want happiness? I have a natural desire for happiness and well-being, and I want to be free from suffering. And then once you have a sense of that, then check that with regard to first a friend, the friend in front of you, and then the stranger, the enemy. So why don't we begin with just oneself first? Is it true I wish to be free from suffering and have happiness and well-being? How do I experience that? Mm. And then direct your attention towards the friend you imagine in front. Is it also true for them that in a fundamental way they're the same as me? In that they wish to have well-being and happiness and to be free from pain, suffering, problems, confusion, misery, unhappiness, and so forth. Mm. And then turn your attention towards the stranger. So the stranger, since you probably don't know much about, you have to use your imagination a bit more. But just try to imagine, yeah, is it true that they're the same in this way? Fundamentally wishing to be free from suffering and to have happiness. And then finally turn your attention towards the enemy, the one you feel more aversion towards. So for the time being, withhold any judgment about them and try to, so looking below the, whatever it is about them or the things they've done that cause you to have dislike. Just thinking about this fundamental question, is this true about them also, that they fundamentally wish to have happiness, well-being, and to be free from dissatisfaction, pain, and suffering. And so is this true for all four of us? You can say oneself and the friend, the stranger, and the enemy. Are we all the same in this regard? Mm. And then the next contemplation is the second reason is that these, the way I relate to other people as friends, enemies, and strangers, it changes just in this life. And then over, many lives, it completely changes. So recognizing, is this true that, this person now, this one person in front is a friend, that it's possible they could become, we drift apart, they become a stranger, or we have a falling out, they become an enemy. The one who now I consider enemy, is it possible, something brings us together, and we become friends or strangers, and the stranger, is it possible we become friends or enemies? So look how you can also look back in your experience of this life, and then, see how our relationships, the way we relate to others changes. And so not to put too much, um, kind of invest too much in a particular way of seeing any of these three people at this moment. And then think about just for a minute, then past and future lives, how from, one life to another, these completely, the way I relate to others as friends, enemies, and strangers completely changes. So with regard to these three, you can think, what, how might we have been connected in past lives? Or how might we be connected in a future life? Will these, the way I relate to them as friend, stranger, enemy, will it change? Or has it changed? Okay, so relax your attention there. We'll have to stop there today. We're out of time. But the way, so if you'd like to practice, it's good if you practice during the week. Um, and the way to do that is just basically continue in the same way. We looked at the first two reasons, two kind of contemplations here, one and two. Um, so then you just basically do the same way with regard to the next three and four. And then, yeah, why isn't it scrolling? I don't know. There we go. Okay. Um, but then also, yeah, three is, yeah, looking at the perspective of others, thinking how these three people I see as one friend, one stranger, one enemy from the perspective of others, they're different things. And then, yeah, and then trying to reduce attachment to the friend and aversion to the enemy, right? And have and thereby kind of also equalize our degree of concern for them. And then, so once we do regard to these three, then we try to add more and more people to each group, and then do the same contemplation with regard to more and more people, right? And then gradually try to extend this to all, all sentient beings. So I think you get the idea. Yeah, sorry, there's no time for a discussion group or really question and answer today. Why don't we dedicate briefly, and then if there's anyone who really has an urgent question, we can continue talking afterwards. I see a lot of things in the chat, but I'm hoping Leah is reading it because I don't have time right now. Yeah. So let's dedicate briefly. Think whatever merit we've created from the beginning of the session till now, and we rejoice in all of that. And then rejoice in all the many, many virtuous good things other people in the world do, are doing, and now have done in the past. Especially all of our spiritual teachers, as well as Dalai Lama, and on back to Shakyamuni Buddha and others. So rejoicing in all this merit gathered together like an ocean of positive energy, we dedicate, in short, that we and all sentient beings may generate this equanimity, equal sense of concern for all sentient beings, without being biased against those we tend to dislike or those we tend to like, but recognizing, the universal kind of nature of all sentient beings and their potential for happiness. And may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering and the cause of suffering, and have every form of well-being and happiness up to full enlightenment. And especially all the different crises facing us personally, or as a community, as a country, as a global community. May solutions to those be found and implemented quickly. And then bring to mind any other prayers you'd like to make. So may all of your own virtuous prayers and aspirations be fulfilled in accordance with your wish, and then also may the Buddha's Dharma flourish in the world, and especially the center land of Medicine Buddha hosting this event. May they be free of any obstacles and have every supportive condition for, every supportive circumstance and, condition for, all their activities to be of the greatest possible benefit, and for the center to grow and develop more and more. And all those who serve and support the center as well. Okay, thank you all. I'll send out some questions to help review tomorrow, the next day, and then maybe at the beginning of next session next week we can start with a question and answer period, in case there's any questions that didn't get a chance to discuss today. Okay.
Thank you, Geshe.